Hello, my friends. It's William with the 1921 Diary Series, and today let us start by asking the question, what do the Russian people want, and will they be the ones who determine their own future? And I say that in the present tense because, of course, it's extremely relevant today. It's always been relevant, but particularly at the moment. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. I'm not a Russian, and even if I was an immigrant, a Russian immigrant to the United States, and I have several friends who are precisely that, I still wouldn't have any say in what is going to happen in Russia. And that is, that seems like a very basic a very basic thing, right? What happens in any given country is not, generally speaking, going to be determined by people outside that country. In most cases, and certainly if what is imposed from outside is not what the people of a country want, then that is going to be problematic from the beginning. So this is something that is relevant to today's diary entry as Dmitry continues to contemplate Russia's future and whatever role he will play in it. So we are on part 2 of the long diary entry of the 31st of January, 18th of February, 1921 in Paris. And I won't tell you his address for the umpteenth time because you already know it very well. So just to recap, yesterday he told us that he'd been having a great many interesting conversations over the past 2 weeks. And yeah, actually, that was silly of me. I was saying, well, we knew what he did for 2 weeks between the 1st and the 14th of January, and we didn't see him having any gatherings or any important conversations. But that was silly of me because what he's talking about is from the 15th to the 16th to the 31st. So that was when this was all happening. So he was talking about that, and he was talking about his frustration with the Trepov group. So a group of emigre monarchists led by Alexander Trepov, who for a brief time in 1916-1917, in fact during the time period when the Rasputin assassination took place, was actually the prime minister of Russia. A very intelligent, very organized, very competent man. And in fact, I found a little bit about him in my Bible of the Russian immigration. So Alexander Zhivakov's book, Les Russes Blancs. And he talks about Trepov in the sense of being one of, in quotes, the heavy weights, the heavy hitters, the heavyweights of the emigration. One of those who tried to remain a heavyweight. They'd been heavyweights in Russia, and they were trying to remain heavyweights outside of Russia, just like the surviving Romanovs were trying to remain relevant to Russia. Okay, so along with these, he mentions General Rumeyko Gorko and the old Minister of Finances, Bark, and also Trepov and a certain person called Baron Nolda who actually called himself a Bolshevik. Oddly enough. I don't know what's behind that. I haven't looked yet to see if Dmitry mentions any of these other people, if they were part of the circle of Russian emigre heavy hitters who were coming to him as their preferred member of the dynasty, bearing in mind that they were all monarchists. And Zhivakov, like Dmitry himself, emphasizes that these were people who believed in the survival of old Russia. So old Russia was not something that Dmitry believed in the survival of. He was looking ahead to some Russian future that incorporated some of the changes that had been made first by the provisional government and then, yes, even by the Bolsheviks. Okay, and he will be giving speeches about this, if we continue on that long, in the 30s. As late as 1936, Dmitry was traveling around France and making speeches along those lines, so for a party very aptly named Young Russia. Okay, so let's dive in. I found that to gather in circles and jot down on scraps of paper in pencil various political programs for the future Russian state was pure nonsense and might even be blank. The future Russia, whether it's an autocratic monarchy or a federal democratic republic, will only be what the Russian people want and will not be determined by a group of refugee bureaucrats. In reality, they don't represent anything except perhaps a more or less blank expressed monarchistic tendency among Russian emigres. Of course, I don't have to blank them, because when they talk abroad about Russian public opinion, they're talking about the opinion of those people, i.e. the monarchist emigres. But, of course, it doesn't follow that Trepov and his colleagues should be taken as the core of the future state apparatus. A year ago, when the group was formed by people gathering around Trepov in Paris in the spring, my first question to them was whether or not they had even the slightest connection to Sovdep, because without knowing what's going on in Russia, all their work amounts to is ladies' chatter over a cup of tea, and at that time the connection was completely insignificant. All right, so yes, he was a dyed-in-the-wool male chauvinist. There's simply no doubt about that. Okay, so as before, we started this one rather abruptly because he had not actually made a paragraph break between what I covered in the video of yesterday and what I started with today. So he's just expressing more of his frustration with the Trepov group, and that, you know, what he said before. These are, well, not exactly old. I mean, Trepov was only 50. I mean, to Dmitry, it probably seemed old. Dmitry was 29. But these people who had belonged to, let us say, the old regime, which is a term that Dmitry himself uses. So they were the bureaucrats and the courtiers of the old regime. And as far as Dmitry is concerned, their devotion to the old regime and how things were done under the old regime is just not tenable. And then he gives us these two possibilities for the future: Russia as an autocratic monarchy or Russia as a federal democratic republic. Both of those are presumably acceptable to him, whereas Bolshevism is not. And he makes this statement that everything is going to be determined by what the Russian people want and not by a group of refugee bureaucrats. Well, you know what to say about that. I'm not sure. I would say in all likelihood that that Soviet Russia was possibly not what the Russian people wanted. Um, you know, I don't know. I don't have any particular inside knowledge about that. Um, I just know that during the Civil War, the Russian people clearly did not at that time want a return to the old regime. And, that's the problem with civil wars. If you're trying to force on people a system that they don't want, then, however capable you are militarily, that's just not going to work. So apparently, you could say that the outcome of the Civil War was what the Russian people wanted, but that's very high above my pay grade. Um, okay, but he's absolutely right. He couldn't be more right that the future of Russia was not going to be determined by a group of refugee bureaucrats. It was not going to be determined by a group of refugee anything. Uh, it was going to be determined within the borders of Russia itself, whether by the people or whether by the Bolshevik power structure. Um, so there are a couple of illegible words, so I apologize for the three blanks. But he's seeing, at least the circles that he's moving in, he sees a monarchistic tendency among the Russian emigres. And again, he's chiding the Trepov group because they seem to equate Russian public opinion with what these people in France, what the Russians in France are saying. And that, of course, is obviously a big mistake. So sort of wishful thinking on their part if what Dmitry says about them is true. And he does not see them returning to Russia. Say if the Bolsheviks were to disappear the next day on 1st February, he doesn't see Trepov and his old regime friends being able to go into Russia and start up again with business as usual. That's also a delusion on their part. And so he tells us that the Trepov group first formed in the spring of 1920. So I need to go back and look at those diary entries at some point. But that they apparently were in touch with him from the beginning. I don't remember the specifics. I remember that there are plenty earlier diary entries when he talks about the Trepov group. And they got in touch with him apparently from the beginning, or he got in touch with them. And his first question to them was this very interesting one of whether they have even the slightest connection to Sovdep. So Sovdep was the Soviet of deputies. So, yeah, what did they call it? Before or right after the Bolshevik Revolution? Before the Bolshevik Revolution, it already existed, these groups called Soviets. A Soviet is a council, and these groups of the Soviet of Workers and Soldiers Deputies. So these were then representatives of workers' groups and soldiers' groups. And I don't think that this term was used in Russia itself. When I looked it up on the Russian language Wikipedia, what I saw was that they said it was something used by the foreign press, so not just the emigre press, but the press outside of Russia at that time, and that it was not something that was used in Russia. But anyway, Dmitry refers consistently to what he perceives as being this core group within the Russian government. And I don't know how powerful at that point, under the Bolsheviks, the Soviet of Workers and Soldiers Deputies was or were, because, every region had its own. It's interesting to note that in 1917, the leader of the provisional government, Alexander Kerensky, made a speech in front of the Sovdep in Petrograd. And he told them, he actually literally, if you can believe it, referred to Dmitri as the first man to fight against Tsarism. Well, that of course was absurd. So why would he do that? Well, because he wanted to end the extremism against the against the Romanovs. He wasn't particularly pro Romanov. I don't think he wanted to see them come back necessarily, but he wanted a stable, non-extreme Russian government. That was what the provisional government was working for, and he might have, given the way he talked about Dmitri specifically, he might have envisioned a future where possibly Dmitri would come back as a constitutional monarch, although he himself did not invite Dmitri to come back. Dmitri was thinking of going back to Russia at that time, but and he was in touch with Kerensky, but Kerensky didn't encourage him to take that step and didn't invite him, and of course he didn't end up going back, which was lucky for him. So, yeah, he continues to be, I think, quite sensible about this, that, we can plot and scheme all we want, but unless we have actual contact with Sovdep and with the government, the Bolshevik government, unless we have people on the inside, we're not going to know, just based on the foreign press, what's actually even going on there. So there had been people during the time of the Civil War, and in the years earlier, from the time of the revolution up until the end of the Civil War, there had been Russians coming and going between Russia, or at least going relatively late, and they would bring news. But now you don't really have that anymore. So the most you might get is from something from a foreign correspondent who's there and being shown what the Bolshevik government want to show him or her. So yeah, he's quite right indeed. And then he makes this very, disparaging comment that what they're doing amounts to ladies' chatter over a cup of tea. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, come on, old boy. The ladies are the ones who have rolled their sleeves up and are doing things for the Russian refugees who are starving and, in some cases living in refugee camps. But yeah, that's Dmitri. He was a little bit of a macho is the wrong word, but he definitely had a very masculine perspective on things, although he had a lot of female friends, so he should have known better. But anyway, yeah, the connection at that time, I don't know why he thought that there ever was sort of people there that I don't know why he thinks there ever, or thought there ever was a connection, an insider who was in contact with the monarchist Russian emigres and was actually a member of Sovdep, but he talks about that all the time. So, but he's saying at that time when the Trepov group was formed, there really was no connection. It was completely insignificant. Okay, so next time he is going to give us, he is going to talk more about what he actually is doing. So this has been all theoretical, and he told us in the previous section that he was happy because actual work was starting to be done, and not just the old regime leaders sitting around and jotting down notes on scraps of paper, but actual work was beginning to be done, and we're going to find out about that, and we're going to find out about his part in that, such as it was. So definitely come back. And in parting, I will just say, because I keep forgetting, this so far, in the first couple of pages of this diary entry, it's been tough because he tends to, either when he's upset or excited about something or when he's in a hurry, he tends to to write more illegibly, to have more misspelled words, to have poorer grammar, and so it's a real pain to do a translation of those sections of the diary. So yeah, I do the best I can, and thank you for bearing with the blank words. Most of them you can get by context anyway. But I just wanted to note before I forget this quite eccentric habit he had of using non-standard Russian words for two very basic words, words that a 5-year-old would know in Russia. And in correct Russian, they are tuda and syuda. So here and there. To go here, tuda, to go there, to go here, syuda, to go there, tuda. And he's the only person that I've ever seen in any of the texts, Romanov or otherwise, from that time period, who changes those words to tudi and syudi. And I've showed that to my Russian friends, and they just say, well, that's stupid. That's absolutely incorrect. And, they're right so far as it goes. But I'm actually beginning to wonder if perhaps it was dialect. He uses a little dialect in the one diary entry in Ilinskaya when he talks about a certain kind of fish, and he uses just one. He uses one spelling for the word, and then in parentheses he uses another spelling of the word. And when I looked the word up, I saw that it was the spelling that was in parentheses that was the standard one. So apparently the other form had been local dialect. So I wish I knew someone who had that level of linguistic knowledge about the Russian language and Russian dialects, but so far I haven't found anyone. So if any of you can shed any light on that, please do comment, and I would be most grateful. So I hope you'll come back to find out about what our man of action is going to do in terms of action with the monarchist, the emigre monarchist community. All right, see you next time. Bye.